All right, let's get into it. We're about to take a journey, a really long one, 4,000 years of Vietnamese history. And what you're going to see is a story that's not just about war and conflict, but about this incredible, almost unbreakable spirit of resilience. And really, that's the big question here, isn't it? How does a nation, a people, a culture, how do they possibly survive 4,000 years of constant conflict and foreign rule? I mean, millennium after millennium of invasions, occupations, you name it. That's the core of the story we're going to unpack. So where else to start but the very beginning? We're talking the birth of the Vietnamese people and their first, get this, millennium-long fight just to exist. Okay, so look at how fast this timeline moves. You've got these early foundational kingdoms popping up, right? Van Lang, then Olak. Things are starting to form, but then bam, 111 BCE, the Han dynasty from China shows up, and that kicks off a period of foreign rule that's going to last for, well, a very, very long time. Seriously, just let that number sink in. Over 1,000 years, a millennium under foreign control. But here's the thing, this was absolutely not a time of just quiet submission. No way. It was full of constant defiant uprisings. You get these incredible figures, these heroes like the Trưng Sisters way back in 40 CE, or Li Bi, who carves out a little independent state for a bit. They become legends, symbols of this relentless drive for independence. It's more than just fighting. It's about forging an identity out of resistance. And that idea is going to stick around for a long, long time. And it all comes to a head at this one battle, the Battle of Bac Dong River. It's just genius what happens here. This general, Ngô Quyền, he comes up with this brilliant plan. He lures the enemy fleet into the river during high tide. But what they don't know is that his men have planted these huge iron-tipped stakes just under the surface. So the tide goes out and, well, you can imagine, the entire fleet is impaled, trapped, completely destroyed. This one incredible victory doesn't just end 1,000 years of foreign rule. It sends a message, right? It sets a precedent that no matter what, Vietnamese independence will always, always find a way to fight back. Okay, so after that incredible victory, independence is finally secured. And this ushers in what you could call a golden age for Vietnam, a time for building a strong, powerful nation under its own great dynasties. And you can see this new confidence right away. In 1054, the Lý dynasty gives the country a new name, Dai Viet, which means Great Viet. And look, this is way more than just a name change. It's a statement. It's a declaration of strength, of stability, of a unique cultural identity. And that name, Dai Viet, is going to stick around for almost 800 years. Now, if you want a perfect example of that resilience we've been talking about, this is it. In the 13th century, the Churn dynasty comes face to face with the Mongols, the biggest, baddest empire on the entire planet at the time. And they beat them. Not once, not twice, 3 times. Their strategy was pure genius. They'd do this strategic retreat, luring the huge Mongol army deep into the country where they didn't know the terrain. Then they'd burn everything, scorched earth, so the invaders had no food, no supplies. And just when the starving, exhausted army tries to turn back, that's when they'd hit them. Hard. This creates a legacy of brilliant strategic warfare, a kind of playbook for how to use your home turf and a whole lot of patience to beat a much bigger enemy. And trust me, they'll use that playbook again. But as we're seeing, history here seems to move in cycles. It's this constant rhythm of unity, then invasion, then a heroic fight to get independence back. So after the incredible success of the Chun, the nation goes through a weaker period. And sure enough, in 1407, Ming China invades. This kicks off a really brutal 20-year occupation. But just like before, a hero emerges. This time it's Lê Loi. He leads this massive rebellion, kicks the Ming out, and founds the new Lê dynasty. But even that great victory eventually crumbles from the inside, leading to power struggles and civil war. And that internal conflict, it becomes the next huge challenge. Because for the first time in a long while, the main threat isn't coming from the outside. It's a deep, painful split coming from within the country itself. So for a century and a half, Vietnam is basically cut in two. You've got the Trent lords up in the north, who are calling the shots, but they keep the emperor around as a kind of figurehead. Meanwhile, down in the south, you have the Nguyen lords ruling their own domain and actually expanding Vietnamese territory. So on paper, it's one country, but in reality, it's 2 rival powers with a big wall between them. And what finally shatters this division is one of the most explosive events in the country's history, the Taishan Uprising. It's led by three brothers, and it just sweeps across the land like a wildfire. The middle brother, Wen, was a military genius. I mean, the stuff of legends. He crushes an invading army from Siam, and then later, after he becomes emperor, he defeats this enormous 290,000-strong Chinese army. Just incredible. But after he dies, the whole thing kind of loses steam. And in the end, it's actually one of the old Nguyen lords, Nguyen Anh, who comes out on top. He's the one who finally reunites Vietnam in 1802 and founds the very last imperial dynasty. So the country is finally whole again, but this unified nation is about to walk into its biggest, most difficult challenge yet, Western colonialism. And that's going to trigger 100 years of almost nonstop war. It all starts around the mid-1800s. France begins its slow, methodical conquest of Vietnam. And over a few decades, they take over everything. The country is completely subjugated. The French administration is there for one reason, really, to exploit the country's resources and its people. And those powerful Nguyen emperors, they become nothing more than puppets. You can just imagine the resentment this created. It planted the seeds for the massive revolutionary movements that were going to explode in the 20th century. And when the 20th century hits, everything just accelerates. It's an explosion of change. So, 1945, World War II ends, Japan surrenders, and boom, the August Revolution declares independence from everyone, the French, the Japanese, and the Vietnamese monarchy itself. Of course, the French aren't having it. They try to come back in, but they suffered this absolutely devastating defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. That's the end of French rule. But here's the tragic irony. That victory doesn't lead to peace. It leads to the country being divided again, which leads directly to the Vietnam War. And that war won't end until 1975 when Saigon falls and the nation is finally reunited. So you see, the Vietnam War, or the American War as it's known there, was really the last bloody chapter in this centuries-long story of trying to create a unified country. You had North Vietnam, the DRV, determined to bring the whole nation under its government. And then you had South Vietnam, the RVN, backed by the United States. It was the ultimate collision of those two themes we've seen over and over: internal division and massive foreign intervention. But even after reunification in 1975, the story isn't over, not by a long shot. The road from the end of that war to the Vietnam we know today, well, it was filled with a whole new set of challenges. You know, you'd think after all that, there would finally be peace, but it just wasn't that simple. Right away, the newly unified country found itself fighting on two new fronts. There was a brutal war with the Khmer Rouge on the border with Cambodia, and at the same time, a short, bloody border war with China up north. Add to that being pretty much isolated from the rest of the world and facing huge economic problems, those post-war years were unbelievably tough. It's just another reminder of that theme. For Vietnam, the end of one struggle often just means the beginning of another. But true to form, Vietnam endured. It always does. By the 1990s, things started to change. The country began to heal those old wounds, to mend fences. It normalized relations with China, and then in 1995 with the United States. And that opened the door for Vietnam to step back onto the world stage, to become the dynamic, modern, and still fiercely independent nation that it is today. And that brings us full circle, doesn't it? Back to where we began. It's been a 4,000-year epic of resisting domination, of being knocked down and getting back up, of being torn apart and piecing itself back together. It's one of the most powerful stories of resilience you'll ever find. Which leaves us with one last big question. After fighting for so long to finally achieve a lasting peace and unity, what comes next? What's the next chapter for Vietnam?